Hi, everybody. Welcome to a Grind City Media Roundtable. I'm Pete Pranica, the television voice of the Memphis Grizzlies, and we're going to talk about the 2017 NBA Draft. We have the smart guys, the wise guys, the brain trust, whatever you want to call them. Mike Wallace, Chris Vernon, Rob
Brain Trust.
Brain Trust.
Yes.
Okay, you're no longer the show, you're the Brain Trust. Okay, got it. All right. What we know right now, as we are taping this, the Grizzlies have nothing on the board. No draft picks at all. 4 second rounds next year, a first and 3 seconds in 2019. Did the Grizzlies get into the draft? Did they sit it out? And if they do sit it out for whatever reason, is that cause for concern?
I think 100% they're going to get into this draft. In the Chris Wallace era, as it were, he doesn't sit out drafts.
No.
Like they do all the preparation. They want to show off that they are talent evaluators. And so this is the fun part, right, of doing all of that work. Given that they have the future assets, I think they'll move some of the future assets, meaning those future picks. Somebody's not going to be in love with a player in the second round or not have a roster spot they need to fill, and the Grizzlies will get there. The other thing is you have a barren Memphis Hustle team that is going to be here playing down the road, and you've got to fill out that roster. You've got the flex positions. You got 2 extra guys that are going to be on a Grizzlies roster, and you've got to fill out a G League roster, as it were. I'll be shocked if they don't come away with the player on Thursday night.
But you have to be smart, too, though. You can't just jump in the draft just for the sake of jumping in to say you want to maintain continuity. But I do know phone calls have already gone out. There's some contingency plans set up with some of the teams in the second half of the second round of the draft. You look at, with Brooklyn having a couple of picks down there, some of those teams that have multiple second-round picks. But here's the other thing, too. Do you want to get into that draft and also potentially unload an expiring contract? You have a James Ennis who's on an expiring contract. You also have a Brandon Wright who's talked about being uncomfortable with his role. Do you sort of shed salary, create more room in free agency, which comes the following week after the draft, and also pick up an asset that you can either stash for either the G League or overseas? You have some options there, and Chris Wallace, Ed Stefanski, and John Hollinger are looking at all of those options.
I would expect the Grizzlies come away with a pick, at least a pick. I won't go 100% like you, but I believe that they'll come away with something. I hope, however, if they get a pick, that it's not your scenario where you get rid of an expiring contract like Brandon or James Ennis. I think you're just getting close to that point, especially with your core. You can't afford to take a step back. And if you're losing guys that actually provide you minutes and are contributors, yeah, you're getting younger, but you're getting younger with a lot of young guys that, do we even know if they can contribute? Right. How many of those young guys that are on the roster do we expect to contribute at all next year? And especially when you're looking down the road 3 years from now. If you're going to use a future second rounder to get a second round pick, whatever. Get another stash guy like Rade is going to be this year, whatever. Get a guy for the hustle, whatever. I don't want to lose guys that you have that play right now because you have to have an NBA roster. You're getting older. You don't want to have half your roster tied up to guys that we don't know if they can play, and they're young. You can't take questions into the season.
You're done with the unknowns.
Yeah, I mean,
right. You don't want to give up a rotation guy, a guy that you know can be in the rotation to get somebody that you don't know.
Well, and you have rotation guys. If Zach's back, well, he's getting older. If Vince is back, he's 40. He's a man.
Yeah.
Mark, we know he's going to need rest here and there. Chandler, I mean, is he going to be on a pitch count when he comes back to start next season? You have to have depth with NBA players. And right now, I think your roster already has too many guys that are big question marks. You add another one, where's that getting you?
Yeah, we've seen teams in the league, and Sacramento was one a year ago, where you had a bunch of guys who were deep in their career and a lot of super young guys and nobody in the middle. Right. And I think that's a really, really rough way to go with the roster. Now, if the Grizzlies do acquire a pick, I mean, look at the second round. Atlanta has 2, Boston has 3, Houston has 2, New York, Denver, Brooklyn, Phoenix, Orlando. Philadelphia has 4, and Utah has 2. Let's segue to this. Who's going to be a big mover and shaker in the draft, particularly? You look at Portland has 3 first-round picks.
Well, looks like Philadelphia already.
Well,
Philadelphia and Boston
exactly.
already. And with Philadelphia's number of picks in the second round, Philadelphia's number of picks they have in the future, Boston's number of picks they have in the future, I would expect they look for everything. Call everybody, who's available, who can we get, whether it's veteran play. I mean, this pick-for-pick deal is kind of odd that we're seeing with the number 1 pick that Boston's making that move. But it's more assets for them that they can go get another player to fit into what they already have, and that was, you know, #1 seed in the Eastern Conference this year.
Yeah, and when you look at the multiple teams with multiple picks, you're looking at teams that, you know, pretty much are already trending sort of younger. They don't need another young, late first round, early second round asset. They need to get a veteran, somebody that's going to help them move up the ladder. But you also got to look at it like this. How much of this league is really saying, you know what, let's just, for lack of a better terms, let's just concede the next 2 years to Golden State and let's get younger and unload everything we have and reload for 2-3 years down the line. That's another aspect there. But to go back to the original point in terms of unloading a potential expiring contract, I wasn't saying that to get rid of somebody who's on a rotation, but you are going to have to create room and space and money in free agency when it comes to re-signing some guys that you have as priorities out there.
Well, and with the free agents that you have, that might take care of itself if guys were to leave. But it's interesting that you bring that up about teams, you know, do we just kind of concede the next couple of years? I think that might be the thought at some places around the league.
But not Boston.
But I think it's the wrong thought. And I think it's the wrong thought because we've got to remember, you've got to have a lot of luck, you've got to have a lot of health to have the run that Golden State's on, and they have. But they've played a lot of basketball. A lot of basketball. At some point, they have to hit some adversity, and someone's going to step up and step in there.
It's funny you say that because I was thinking about this weekend. I was reading something about the old Oklahoma City team that had, which presumably is going to have the top 2 guys in the MVP voting this year in Westbrook and Harden, and they also had Durant, right, on that team.
MVP,
And if we were to rewind, they played the Miami Heat, and the conversation at the time was, how many times do these 2 teams meet over the course of the next decade?
0.
They met once.
Yeah,
it's one of those, and it just does make you think. Like, you just never know.
But
you really
that
don't.
was a little different, Chris, because the owner stepped in. Clay Bennett said, I'm not going to pay this guy.
Right.
He's not worth, I can't afford 3 max guys. And if you do it over again, you do absolutely pay those guys to keep that team together. Because
But we
what
wouldn't
are you
have thought the Heat would be breaking up either. We thought that was going to be 5, 6, 7, as they said at the conference.
Yeah, LeBron, I was there for that press conference. They went 4 straight. You know what I mean? They ran into a Dallas team that they should have beaten, and then a San Antonio team at the end that was just hell-bent on revenge.
You know, what's interesting, and to circle back to the Grizzlies, the Grizzlies do have young assets, okay? Now, Rade Zagorac, coming over from Serbia, the hope is that he'll play Summer League ball for the Grizzlies. You have Wayne Selden, who's going to play Summer League ball. You have Deontay Davis. I mean, Dede was somebody that a lot of guys had as a first-round pick, and the Grizzlies kind of lucked into him in the second round. So you're not really bereft of young assets whether or not you end up getting a pick in the draft.
We think. And I'm with you on Dede. I think he's terrific, and I think he can be terrific. But Wayne Selden, 82 games. Do we know for sure? Rade, do we know anything about Rade?
Which is why Summer League is going to be so important if Rade plays, and we know obviously.
Jarrell.
Yeah.
What do we know about Jarrell? What's Jarrell's future with this? Wade
we're 2
Baldwin.
years in.
What do we know about Wade Baldwin? What do we know about his future?
Yeah.
So how patient can you be? How long can you wait? Continue to add young assets when you have Max Guy and Chandler, Max Guy and Mark, Max Guy and Mike, and then you have Zach. I mean, you still have to win now by adding some of those young pieces, but you can't add too many because you can't afford to take a step back with the money.
I think this draft is going to be about those two-way contracts, right?
Yeah.
And getting guys that can be, because I think the Grizzlies, rightfully so, look back at last year's training camp, and they had 2 guys that really, really performed in Troy Williams and in Wayne Selden. Well, they didn't have room. They made room by cutting Jordan Adams to make room for Troy Williams. But they lost Troy Williams because they needed to make room again. And if he would have been on that 2-way contract, both of those guys, both Troy and Wayne, could have been 2-way players. And so I think this year, that's what they want, right? They want to find this year's Troy Williams, Wayne Selden, and get them on a 2-way contract so that they be under control of franchise.
And just to clarify,
you don't even have to. They didn't draft either one of those
Right.
guys. So if they stand pat and don't do anything, you know they're still working to bring in those kind of guys.
They also have a lot of they've got goodwill built up with the agents now because of what they did with Andrew. They drafted Andrew in the second round, and Andrew went for a year to go play in the D League for Iowa. And then it worked out for him. They did roster him and brought him up. And so they could kind of make that pitch to prospective players and agents like, hey, we take care of our guys. We're trying to be a team that's good at player development.
And just to wrap this up, for people who aren't familiar with the two-way contracts, the revised CBA now allows a team to have 17 players, 2 of whom are two-way players that can shuttle back and forth between the parent team and the D-League/G League team.
Yeah.
So,
and we can't deny the fact the draft history hasn't been kind for the Grizzlies. But something that has been very kind for the Grizzlies, finding those players. James Johnson, great find that the Grizzlies had. JaMychal Green, great find that the Grizzlies had. Wayne Selden, maybe. I mean, you hope that those guys are that. They've had a lot of success finding those type of players.
all right, guys, thanks for the time. And a reminder that we will be with you on Thursday night, probably about 5:30, 6 o'clock, for the 2017 NBA Draft. We'll talk a little bit about what's going to happen, and if the Grizzlies do ultimately get into the draft, you'll find out here on Grind City Media.